So not for the first time we're returning to this subject. And of course that is, we're talking once again about the British Empire. Now one of the very first videos that got a lot of attention, especially in the comments, about Brexit was the fact that a lot of Brexiteers were bringing up the fact and invoking the British Empire as if this was a good thing and that we should bring it back. And I tried to get this explained to a lot of people. If you really want to truly understand Brexit, you have to understand the lack of proper education that has been around the British Empire, the fact that it has been overly whitewashed by people in this country, and the fact that it is viewed overall in this country as a positive, when in reality it really is not. And as most countries that had an empire, it's very, very complex and complicated, and in reality only a very, very, very few, like we have now, the top, shall we say, echelons of society really actually benefited from the empire itself. Now, we're going back to, in fact, ironically, in that very first video, I went over this quote exactly, but this is a new article, and it's called From Prospect Magazine, and it's time to be honest about Britain's story and come to terms with the reality of empire. And this is something we really, really need to get a grip on. So, without a reckoning with our past, the 21st century Britain will struggle to forge a national story that functions for the country we are rapidly becoming. On the 20th of October 2018, a Save Brexit rally was held in Yorkshire. A Leave voter who had just had his photograph taken with Nigel Farage did a short interview with a television crew from Sky News. What he said to the camera was this: "For God's sakes, let's just get on with it. I mean, we're British. We stood alone for years. Let's just do it, you know. I mean, I was watching a thing with the Queen. There's billions of people in the Empire. Let's get back to being the British Empire again. That's what it's all about, you know. It's about being the British Empire." A single interview with a single voter on a single day. Not the manifesto of a mass movement, yet still an expression of a view that was either long before the EU referendum. And it was absolutely true. You heard this all the time. You only have to go back and look at the rhetoric of the Brexiteers before then. It's still there. It was always had been there. This mythologizing of the British Empire, and apparently that Britain had been this, when it joined the EU, it had become this chained nation. So anyway, we continue. More than half a century after the British Empire began to disintegrate, it remains the biggest story in British history. An epic and tragic tale of how a tiny nation created a giant empire and then, within a span of a single life, lost it all. But in Britain's overstretched, under-resourced classrooms, the empire has been largely displaced by a twin obsession with the Third Reich and American history. The latter often taught with little emphasis on the decades during which the American colonies were part of the First British Empire. When the British flag was lowered across the quarter of the world that it had once been pink, an empire of territory and domination was replaced by an empire of delusions, a fancy realm which the truth has never which the truth never rises. When the inglorious chapters of the imperial story, slavery, the Indian famines, the genocide in Tasmania, are forced into the national conversation, they are revised away. After all, the British rule was nothing more benign than that of the Belgians in the Congo, was less brutal than the imposed on Namibia by the Germans. The closing down of this imperial debate and its absence in schools means that few in Britain recognise now that the imperial project enriched the nation how the imperial project enriched the nation, or how often the colonial rule was underwritten by extraordinary violence. Nor is it understood how British culture, the English language, and British cuisine were influenced by 4 centuries of imperial encounter. In schools and in public debate, we need to confront this vast and vastly neglected aspect of British and global history. We need not just examine the difficult truths, but also accept that the imperial story is one that we share with billions of people around the world. We do not get to decide if the British Empire was a force for good or ill. Schools need to be empowered to teach a curriculum that focuses far more on the empire, but also on how empire seeps through into other aspects of the national story, such as the Industrial Revolution and the 2 world wars. To call for such a reassessment is not, as so often is claimed, an exercise in identity politics. There are multiple reasons why we should confront the imperial past, and among them is our national self-interest. Our poorly examined, half misunderstood misremembering of what the empire was and what it is not has spawned a strain of imperial exceptionalism, a delusional mindset that is actively damaging to Britain's interest in the 21st century. The warped nostalgia that surrounds the empire rendered Britain and its leaders almost oblivious as to how the empire is remembered in the former colonies, and resented in many of them. The state of ignorance creates the atmosphere in which dangerously half-baked fantasies like the Empire 2.0, Global Britain, and the Cans UK are able to take root. The shakiness of their historical foundations would be more apparent in a nation that truly knows its imperial past. Again, one of the first big videos I did that got a lot of attention in Brexit, and people commenting saying, no, this isn't gonna happen, this isn't what people want. Yet Empire 2.0, Global Britain, and the Cans UK are all figments and fantasies relating to the British Empire. They're fantasies based on a really poisonous nostalgia. All this needs to change for another reason. Without such a reassessment of the 21st century Britain, we'll struggle to forge a national story that functions for the country we are rapidly becoming. One in which, by the 2050, a third of the population will be BAM, which is Black, African, mixed ethnicity. I think it stands for. I can't remember what it stands for now. Or of mixed heritage. If demographics is destiny, then the old story of the civilizing mission, the British paternalism, and the white man's burden is dead weight on our backs. We need to create a new collective story to share with one another and with the former colonies, and we need to do it fast. On the eve of its third decade, it is clear that the 21st century will be dominated by the economic and military giants like the US and China. The giant trading blocs like the EU, having been a giant in the earlier age, will count for nothing. Childish dreams of being the British Empire again are doomed attempts to project the past onto the future. Instead, we should come to terms with the empire, the violence and the exploitation that were part of it, and take a sober look at who we really are. A middle-sized, relatively stable democracy with the 6th largest economy in the world, and make our peace with that. We remain, by dint of our remarkable history, a nation that still has a special role to play in the world. And that's true. I agree 100% of that. And again, if people somehow think that us leaving the EU is going to be better, it's not. This was a part of the whole Brexit mess that we are now getting into, is going to be, and partly fueled by this nostalgia for the empire that is horribly mischaracterized, misremembered completely, and exists in a national nostalgia of a country that, again, never really existed and can never exist again. So, yeah, understanding this complete fantasy that is often built up around the British Empire is completely part of this whole Brexit mess. And some people, again, still don't believe me when I bring this up, but it is still part of it all. And we need to, as this article said, have a really good, frank, open discussion. It is not, washing away our identity. That doesn't change who we are now. It's coming to terms with the past. Many other countries have done similar things. Belgium and Portugal come to mind. Again, we've discussed their relations to their empire and how, certainly in their countries, I'm sure people will tell me how it's viewed in their countries, not over here as something nostalgic that we should, aspire to again. But there you go. Yeah, just another part of the whole Brexit mess we're getting ourselves into. And it is one part that fueled all this.